Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers for May 9th, 2019. All managers are present except Manager Maxwell. I see no members of the public, so we'll move along to approval of the agenda. We're going to delete item 11.2. Are there any other changes? Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
I'm going to give that to Manager Rognus. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have introduction of new staff. Mr. Beck?
President White, Board of Managers.
You're letting them sit down?
I am introducing our two field assistants today that are going to be working with us from April till approximately April till October. We typically have 1 to 2 field assistants depending on how much field work we have this year. We have quite a bit because we're implementing several projects this year. So Chris Cusick and Dan Schachter are going to be working with us, and they can each give a little bit of background on education and some work history as well.
Sure. I'll go first. I recently finished up my Bachelor's of Science degree at University of Minnesota Duluth in the fall, environmental science. Some work background. Last summer, I was an intern for Xcel Energy, their environmental services crew, so I participated in various NPDES projects with nuclear plants, and that had a lot of ties to the biology and ecology with the river and larval fish, all sorts of things like that. And I also participated in a lot of electrofishing and seining, along with lab work and technical reports, data analysis. So I'm excited to be with MCWD and to implement those things I learned with Excel and my educational background. Some things that we've been doing are carp removal, so I'm familiar with the electrofishing and trying to get those guys out of the watershed. Easier said than done, but we're giving it our best shot. And also the water quality side of things, which I'm not quite as familiar with. I'm looking forward to learning how that all ties into the ecological backgrounds of the watershed, and yeah, just learning as much as I can and gaining as much as experience and looking to help out wherever I can.
Welcome.
Well, my name is Chris Cusick, and I just finished up my master's degree in water resources science at the University of Minnesota here in Twin Cities. I did my undergrad in applied plant science, graduated back in 2011. I spent 5 years managing a sheep farm in Bloomington, and then decided I probably needed to reorient a little bit and went back to school. Related work experience, sheep notwithstanding, I, within my time in school, did a number of different projects. The most consistent research assistantship I had was with Bowser, working as kind of just a researcher, map maker, memo writer, that sort of thing, mostly for the watershed-based funding program that was going on there, in addition to some field work I did on the Dobbins Creek project down near Austin, Minnesota, just doing some water quality monitoring, running machines, getting samples. So that brings me to here, and I'm really excited to be here. It's a neat watershed in that it kind of spans so many different land uses and different activities within monitoring, so I'm excited to get a breadth of experience while working here over the field season.
Well, welcome.
Can I ask you a question on the sheep farming part?
Yeah.
That's where everybody wanted to go.
What kind of farming?
On the
Sheep.
applied plant science,
Yep.
were you doing something related to that with the flocks?
Applied plant science is what the U was mostly calling crop science at the time, so it was agricultural, and I got interested in the kind of perennial aspect of pasture management as opposed to annual crop farming.
Okay.
So I was looking to get onto a farm.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And you cannot borrow the electrofishing for the open air.
Hey, that goes to a vote, doesn't it? There are two items on the consent agenda: approval of the minutes of the April 25 board meeting and adoption of Resolution 19056, amending the School Lake Preserve Conservation Easement. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Rognus, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Manager Miller. Those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Manager Miller?
This School Lake Preserve easement, is that one we talked about a couple years ago, or is this something?
Manager Mill and managers, it's within the last year. This is the, otherwise known as the Wally Marks property.
Okay.
And so this is an amendment that's reconfiguring some lot lines and where the buffers go, but the board had already acted previously on the easement.
Okay.
Mike's here in Laura's place if you get any more specific questions.
It looked like they were giving us easements on quite a bit of...
Manager Miller, managers, we have 70 acres of conservation easement.
Okay.
There's no net loss or gain. It's simply, it was a modification to the lot to actually bring more of the wetland buffer into the protected easement. So it would avoid any mowing or
Okay.
any disturbance by a future landowner, and put some of the protected woodland into their lot that there can be no removal of trees or anything like that.
Great.
So it's actually a more protective and prohibitive sort of adjustment, but it doesn't change their buildable area or change the area of the conservation easement.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. I, last week, sat in on the first session of the onboarding process for Manager Hejmati, and will continue to join those events. On the mod front, the resolution committee is already gearing up to start in June, even though there are 2 weeks left in the legislature. So they'll be, I'll be working on that. We just handed out a new updated CAC schedule to reflect the new manager's positions. So, for your information. And that is all I have. Manager Rognus, the CAC?
Yes, I attended the CAC committee meeting on the 1st of May, and this was really a big presentation time for Tiffany. She explained the development of monitoring the hydrology and flood control, and for the district with the members of the CAC, and explained the development of sensors that are going to be measuring the inputs of the various inlets into the lake, and also at the other end as well. She talked at some length about the number of calls she receives as the weather person, and she receives a lot of calls when the weather is changing from sunny to stormy, but she seems to have been weathering that whole process very nicely, with a good attitude. She demonstrated to the group how modeling would be done in the future in order to better predict the flow of the creek, and she's gotten a lot of very positive feedback from the community for her work on this subject. Let's see. The rest of another hour was spent really in her giving a very complete explanation of the master plan for the Minnehaha Creek sub-watershed, and that was very well received from the group, and everybody seemed to be very enthusiastic about it. So that's it.
Attendance?
Attendance was good.
Okay.
I think there were 15.
Wow.
So,
That'd be the full complement, wouldn't
Yep.
yeah.
it? Yeah.
Wow. Terrific.
Thank you, Manager Rognus. Manager Loftus, Operations and Programs Committee report.
Yes, thank you. We did meet this evening. We focused on the research and monitoring program. Staff, led by Mr. Beck, gave us a presentation on their strategic direction that they'll be working on over the next few months. And they are looking to move from a data collection program to both data collection and assessment. So talked for an hour or so about how they're going to be doing that, and that they will be coming back to the operations committee over the next few months to check in and let us know where they want to head. Specifically, it deals with the not just water quality, but the AIS program, where we've been in the past and where we'll be in the future. So we'll keep you up to date when they come back.
Thank you. Have managers attended any other events or meetings they'd like to report on? Okay, then we will move on. Just note that the upcoming meeting and event schedule is printed in the agenda. We'll go to item 11.1, Resolution 19057, and look to Ms. Christopher.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, managers. Tonight, staff is requesting approval of the City of Mound's local water management plan. And I'll provide a quick overview of the plan, starting with just orienting you to the location. I'll cover the resource issues and management priorities that the district has identified for this part of the watershed, the things that Mound has identified as implementation priorities in their plan, the actions they've flagged for the coordination plan that we require, regulatory authority, and then finally staff's recommendation. So just to orient you to the area, Mound covers about 3.5 square miles on the west side of Lake Minnetonka. It's entirely within the district and includes portions of the Lake Minnetonka, Dutch Lake, and Langdon Lake subwatersheds. The primary issues that we identify for this area of the district in our plan are nutrient impairments. There's 5 water bodies that Mound drains to that are on the state impaired waters list and have total maximum daily load requirements, load reduction requirements for the city. Altered shorelines are another issue in this area, of course, being on Lake Minnetonka. And some of the key strategies that we've identified in our plan for this area are upstream restoration, so particularly in the Pana Creek and 6 Mile Creek subwatersheds, protection through permitting, coordinating with the city and others to identify opportunity-based stormwater management opportunities, and then promoting shoreline best practices through educational efforts. The things that Mound has identified as kind of top implementation priorities for this plan cycle are addressing the load reduction requirements for those 5 impaired water bodies, promoting low impact development for any new or redevelopment that happens within the city, maintaining their existing storm sewer and ponds, evaluating any street or utility improvements for potential to improve stormwater management, correcting any local flooding issues, and then expanding public education. Within their coordination plan, which the district was a big part of the requirements for this plan cycle, the city identified an annual meeting primarily to talk through the annual CIP, as well as any kind of pending redevelopment, coordinating on past projects and the maintenance of those, and as well as regulatory coordination. They've committed to routing land use applications to the district and also making sure that district permits are obtained before they would issue their own approvals, coordinating on compliance and inspections, considering any key conservation areas that the district has identified within their kind of land use and zoning decisions, And then also early coordination on any infrastructure improvements that they might advance, making sure they're getting those on our radar early so we can look at partnership opportunities. And then finally assisting in any education and outreach efforts where they can. The city currently does not have any sole regulatory authority for any district rules, and they are not proposing to acquire that. They do have local government unit status for the Wetland Conservation Act, which they are proposing to retain, so no changes in terms of regulatory authority. So staff has verified that the plan meets all the necessary requirements, both of the state and of the district, and is recommending approval. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19057?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson. Any questions for Ms. Christopher? Manager Miller.
Just looking at the question that comes up, it's pretty dense development. This map, shows a lot of streets. It's totally served by sanitary sewers, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So.
That seems to be an obvious question.
Yeah,
Because I presume a lot of these homes were originally seasonal homes and stuff. Okay.
Yeah, and I know that they just recently completed a pretty significant overhaul of a lot of their streets and utilities, so they're not anticipating a lot of those kinds of projects in the near future, but they did incorporate, I know, some stormwater improvements when they went through and did that cycle.
Manager Agnes.
This report is amazingly in-depth. And I was kind of surprised about it. And I compare it back to something like Shorewood, and it just seems like, it's much more elaborate. And is it because of the extreme being surrounded by water that it makes it that much more complicated?
I guess I'm not sure. Manager Agnes, managers. I know a lot of the report was their pretty extensive SWIP, or their stormwater pollution prevention plan for the state. And they were very thorough in including kind of all the components of that. But I think that is certainly something kind of all the cities have as just part of those state requirements. But they were very thorough in their explanation of it.
That literally is halfway through the report is where that kicks in.
Right.
So that's 134 of the pages.
Mr. Whisker.
Another observation I'd have in response to Manager Rognus's question is the staff over there have just been really great to work with and very supportive of the district and plugged in on water resources. Their city manager was the former and still current public works director. So wearing dual hats and coming from that public works perspective and having to deal with a lot of this, I think that's sort of woven into the intensity with which they've approached the local water plan. And they've really grasped the district's regional approach and been a vocal proponent and supporter to City Council and the residents of our work upstream on 6 Mile and how that's a direct benefit to the city of Mound. So I think that there's just a lot of understanding within the city of water resources and how that works with what the district's doing.
Where are the key conservation areas, or have we identified key conservation areas?
Sure, Manager White, managers. That wasn't as big of a component in this plan as in our last one, but I know, one of the areas offhand would be the east side of Dutch Lake is in Mound, and that's where we've, got some property, and there's kind of the big woods over there, and there's been past conversations about different parcels along that area. So that's one I would know offhand. I'm not sure of any other significant ones within Mound.
Manager Olson.
And a real quick question. You said it was 3.6 square miles. Is that land area or is that land and water together?
Land and water.
Thank you.
Holy cow, it's small.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Now, in 2014, along with some other cities, they had problems with I&I, and I know they were going to address that. Was this discussed at all in developing this plan?
Not that I know of. I can check back in that. Renee had most of the kind of exchanges throughout the review process. I kind of came in on the tail end, but not that I know.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else for Ms. Christopher? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
Let's move to item 11.3, which is resolution 19052. Ms. Reynolds.
Good evening, President White, managers. Tonight we are looking at the IT consultant contract, and staff is requesting the board's improvement of the contract and authorization to sign it. And we'll just kind of run through this and the IT information a little bit, giving you just a brief glimpse back at the purpose of what we're looking at to do with this IT consultant, the background of where we've been and where we're going, the goals, and then the budget that we have for the consultant, the objectives, and the contract. So once again, looking at the purpose, stems back to that 2017 strategic alignment plan and the acknowledgement during that we need to kind of bring everything together and look at the IT sources and the technology that is being utilized within the district. We started back in May of 2018, really kind of starting to focus in on this process, and over the course of the last year have been in front of the OPC a couple times and here to the board, bringing information back to you in doing a detailed business analysis, which really fed into the goals development and the RFQ development for the IT consultant. The goals that we developed through that business analysis for the IT was to improve the quality of analysis, planning, and decision-making of the organization, streamline business processes and improve efficiencies, integrate and align interdepartmental workflow, and improve the transparency and accountability and customer service of the district. So the budget that we put into the 2019 budget for the IT consultant was $100,000. And that was planned kind of for the consulting services and to begin initial system purchases and implementation. 2020, as we anticipate this will go into 2020 and possibly on beyond. Those recommendations for that budget will be developed through that phase 1 work with the consultant. So the objectives for the IT consultant that came from the RFQ that the RFQ that we put out was really to help us with the identification of systems and softwares, the testing and selection of the systems, the phasing of the implementation in a logical rollout sense for the program in the district, the integration of those systems, the implementation and sustainment, budget planning, and then user and staff training to make sure that we can utilize the systems and the integrations in between the two systems efficiently. So the contract that we have that we're seeking approval on is an hourly not to exceed contract for $38,904 for phase 1. And through phase 1, the consultant will be helping us with project initiation and scoping of it, doing some initial system identification, looking at getting a list of vendors available that we will look at more detail as we go through, really refining the system requirements that we need, starting with that business analysis that we've put together, and then using that and those process steps to really go through that and refine what the requirements are for the systems. Conducting a couple of risk management workshops to make sure that we're prepared and we're looking at these systems with open eyes and this whole process to work through it and identifying and making sure we know where we're going to hit risks and stumbling blocks. Then really develop a timeline and initial system phasing recommendations. As we look at this, we can't roll out 5 products all at one time. We need to figure out what is our logical flow of rolling out products and implementing those products. And then developing the 2020 budget estimate with a deadline of that by July 15th so we can incorporate that into our budget recommendations into the board. And then doing a final report and presentation on this part, on the phase 1. We hope to have that to probably OPC to help fill out, but we're kind of at OPC committee to see where it comes in, to really fill out and give you the information to help you support and understand what the budget numbers are that you're being presented with. And hopefully that will be at that August 8th meeting. And throughout all of this, the IT consultant is going to be coordinating with our GIS technician that we brought on to make sure that we're incorporating the GIS and the GIS philosophy and integration of all that into the IT technology that we're rolling out, and also working hand in hand with the website redesign to ensure that any systems that we're looking at will be coordinated with the website and work with the website as we roll out that new implementation. So that's phase 1, and work on that one would be coordinated and complete through August 8th of 2019. From there, we would roll into phase 2 work, And phase 2 work would come back to you with a new contract amendment to this to authorize the conduct of the phase 2. And through this phase 1, we'll be looking at the 2020 budget, but also looking at the remainder of that 100,000 and what is our budget for the rest of 2019. How much of that is going into IT consultant versus what are we using for system implementation? So kind of what does the rest of 2019 look like in that scope and phasing, and then on into 2020. Phase 2 will also be looking at more of the system, the specific system identification and selection and the implementation of it. The long-range budget planning, are we still in implementation going into 2021? What do we need for that? In addition to what's our budget for licensings and maintenance contracts for the systems we implement? And then continuing that coordination with our GIS and the website. So that kind of the summary of what we're looking for the IT consultant. And tonight we're asking for the board to approve the contract with WSB for the phase 1 work. And then we would be back in front of you asking for phase 2 authorization for an amendment, probably in July or August.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19052?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rodness. Are there questions? Manager Loftus?
One question. Kathy, could you go back a couple slides? This one, phase 2.
Phase 2?
Can you help me understand the difference between what they're doing in phase 1 and phase 2 besides timeline?
Right. So phase 1, we are really looking at kind of the big picture, what's the realm of potential vendors out there for the types of systems we're looking at, and refining what our specific requirements are for those systems. So then in phase 2, we will start applying those requirements and looking at those specific vendors' products and doing selections of the products. So phase 1 is kind of the big picture, what do we need, what are our specific requirements, and phase 2 is applying those requirements to the potential systems and doing a selection of the system and then the implementation of it.
And what went into, what thought went into the decision of doing a contract amendment versus just giving pricing for both phases?
I think really looking at it because we're not sure exactly where we're going and what's the timeline look for the rollout of it. And I think, 2019 will still be probably a little bit heavier on consultant time and not as much into implementation, or not as many systems that we're buying. So it's really trying to get a scope of what we're looking at, because for that, looking at the business analysis, they have a good idea, but I think it's to help kind of scope out what we're looking at and see where we're going, and then identify what systems we're going to be putting into it as we kind of roll into phase 2. I know they were estimating, they said the 68,000, which is really the remainder of the 100,000, but they said, what systems versus what's consultant is kind of unknown as we kind of roll into that. And I'm hoping it's more, we'll be pushing more towards the systems side than the consultant side.
But you're locked in with WSB for phase 2 then, if it's just an amendment versus a bid?
We could not sign an amendment with them if we weren't happy with the phase 1 work, and go back out for a new contract if we so desired.
We're hoping they do a good job.
Yeah, no,
We like their approach. We like what they're presenting, and so we anticipate that we'll be in a position to go straight into phase 2. But by doing it through the contract amendment as well, it does give us that opportunity that if we don't like where we're at and we're not satisfied with the services, we could go back out for a new contract if we wanted to and not do the amendment.
yeah. I like knowing the cost of the house before I'm at the closing type of thing. It's just you're kind of married at that point, and,
Mr. Wisker?
Well, just a little bit more on that, and to Manager Loftus's point, I think Kathy outlined it pretty well, but phase 1 is just planning. So what are the products out there that we could buy to store and retrieve data for permitting, capital projects, project maintenance, and land management? And there's a variety of off-the-shelf options. And what we want the consultant to do is sort of evaluate those products, how, if there's 3 options for projects, 2 options for permitting, which ones work best for those data silos, but how well they might talk to each other, and then give us a recommendation for which ones we should buy, how well they work together. And that's really going to inform the order in which you buy the products and the work that the consultant has to do to write code to make them talk to each other, and basically the cost for phase 2. And so we can't know the total cost without doing this first phase, which is planning work, which is why we built in the breakpoint.
Manager Miller?
This is way out of my pay grade, but you know, I can't delve into, you know, and understand like Bill could, but it seems to me we want a system that follows our restructured organization.
Yes.
And is that what we're going to have?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, a little bit about the process. We've got a multidisciplinary team of program managers or staff from every single department that understands their unique needs. Kathy, myself, we had 2 board liaisons. We did the RFQ. We've run rounds of interviews, and we've done a multitude of reference checks for all the finalists, and we're quite confident in WSB. And again, the first phase is, while we do want something that represents our new structure, how you store and retrieve information to process permits is going to look a little bit different than how you store and retrieve information if you're a capital project manager. So there are systems out there, asset management software, permitting software, that are off the shelf. We want the consultant to evaluate those, look at the functional trade-offs. You know, what are the bells and whistles? What can they do? What do they cost? How well do they talk to each other? And give us a recommendation for the pieces and how to put them together. And then the last piece will be, that's going to tie into a lot of the information that we collect and store is tied to a geography, because we're a watershed. So it all feeds into GIS, which is map-based data collection, and our website. So that's the work that we're hiring a consultant to do, and it's the sort of the GIS and the website that provide those overarching organizational dashboards where you can grab information internally, look at it, or communicate to the public. But again, the consultant's job is really to look at what products are available off the shelf for the different data storage and retrieval needs of these different departments, and make sure we're picking ones that don't have functions that we don't need, is just the right fit, will work together, is the right price, that they're laid out in the right order over the next year and a half, so that we can build something that works. And that plan is the plan that's going to come in front of the operations committee and the board. So even though it's above my pay grade too, use Manager Miller's language, we should have a clear picture from the consultant. That's the test for them, is to lay out, these are the products you should buy, put them together in these order, this is how it will work, this is what you'll be able to do when you're done. And that's your decision point as a board after phase 1. Do you want to spend the money to go buy those products and keep working with WSB to make it work for staff? So rather than bring all of that forward, and that break point, they're going to deliver you hopefully a clear roadmap and plan for what you're spending over how many years, and how the functions that you gain by buying that software.
So to Manager Loftus's figure of speech, we're hiring an architect. We're not quite buying the house yet. Something like that. Manager Miller.
It's good enough.
So what I would look for is, you know, I'm a planner or a developer or a homeowner, and I can go to the website and find out what pipe shed I live in, if I'm in a built area, or what sub-watershed district if I'm in a rural area, and how much water flows out of there into the lake, etc.
Yep.
And, okay.
Yeah.
And, all right.
So the
Sounds good
website,
to me.
you know, the permitting database will store all the permits that you collect.
Okay.
The presentation that Brian gave you about the technology we deploy will pipeline information for how much water is flowing through the watershed. And GIS will grab data from both permitting and research and monitoring and make that visually accessible on the website. So if you wanted to go into a geography and find out where have you built projects, where are the permits being issued, how much water is flowing, that's how people will be able, from the public side, be able to access information. If you're a planner outside of the organization or a general public member, they're going to get that data out of the website, and it's GIS that's going to pull from those different software packages to make it available. Internally, it's basically the same process, but staff will have access likely to much more information because we're looking at things on a much more granular level.
Okay, let me ask another question if I could.
We might design the thing tonight if we keep going.
Has anybody got one like this?
Our experience, I think, through the interviews and looking at other watersheds is that not many other watersheds have something this comprehensive, and that one of the things that we heard back from the consultants that they said was refreshing, probably because it's a little bit more work, is that we're being intentional and planful about the needs that we want to fulfill on each department basis, but then how it all fits together rather than just doing a little bit of coding for permitting and patching together a database, or doing a little bit of GIS. And that's what we see a lot of other organizations doing, is build as you go, rather than take a strategic view of what are we trying to accomplish as an organization, and therefore what does each department need and how will it work together. I think there are a number of cities out there that have comprehensive systems like this. We've looked at what Minnetonka does, and cities are a little bit different, but there are examples out there of the work that we're trying to do.
Okay.
The consultants were very complimentary about how the staff had put together a very clear and detailed outline of what they were looking for. They said it was much easier for them to put their proposals together rather than somebody saying we're from an organization that just completely relies on you to tell us what we need. Our team did a lot of that detail, and they were able to give us a pretty good estimate. The other thing too is that any one of the people we interviewed could have done this. We didn't have a lot of easy to discriminate between them, but the one being recommended is very experienced in a lot of different areas other than just water too. So we're gonna. And by the way, your question related to the website, that's a different decision for another night.
Yeah, I understand that, but I know it's going to fit in there. I have a hard time understanding why we'd be the forefront of this. I mean, there's thousands of water management organizations around the country, and some have been in business a lot longer than we have, and are much bigger and bigger. And there's no example of a perfect system out there?
Mr. Whisker.
We're not on the leading and bleeding edge, and that's not, we're not looking to be early adopters and test pilots and guinea pigs for new technology here. And that was one of the selling points of what WSB brought to the table, is there were other vendors that had a heavy emphasis and a deep bench of coders that could build you any custom database you want that would be the only thing out there and a perfect fit for us, or so they would tell you. And it would come with a lot of sustainment costs and long-term ties to that firm because they're building you something custom. WSB's job is to find not the perfect fit, but what meets 90% of our needs. We're going from no technology to wanting basic functionality. And there are software packages for municipalities or organizations like ours at state and federal level that store permitting type data and make that accessible and easy to query. And there is asset management software for public works or people that are building boardwalks or storm ponds or creek remeanders or whatever. So WSB's job is to look for the best fit of off-the-shelf software that comes with licensing fees, a lot of IT support, is plug and play, recommend which pieces fit together best. That will then pipeline into GIS and onto our website. So we're not in any way looking to invent our own systems and be way out in front. And that's one of the reasons that WSB stood out through the interview process, was their approach to that. The limited piece of custom coding that they would do is to make one piece of software from permitting, where all that permitting data is stored, talk to the water quality monitoring data that is stored in a different software package that we've already purchased, the Whiskey software, and then make sure that GIS is grabbing just the right amount of information to make maps and make that information available to the website. So the consultant's job is to pick the boxes and then write a little bit of code to make the boxes talk to each other. And we're looking to buy product that's off the shelf, that's been tested and vetted and proofed by other guinea pigs.
Mr. Wells.
Managers, legal's job in circumstances like this is to put the structure in place that allows the watershed to do the work that they want to do. And as you know, the history with the technology contracting has been long, let's just say. But the piece that James and I talked about offline that is good and keeps the legal framework simpler in this case is this off-the-shelf idea and minimizing the custom software, because as opposed to almost any other product that the watershed buys from, say, Mr. Meehan and his firm, this involves intellectual property, and the more custom you make it, the more complicated the legal structure is and the more difficult the intellectual property rights become to negotiate, because the consultant doesn't want to do this as work for hire, because once they figure out their system, they want to sell it, and that's fairly reasonable. But the way around that is to not have a highly customized system, but instead plug in the right elements into a fairly lean system. So, as I say, legal is not meant to be involved in this strategically and doesn't need to be. But if I saw this heading in a direction that was going to have a lot of legal costs for managing intellectual property rights, I would be more anxious. So I like the direction it's going because I think it'll keep the legal structure to be fairly simple.
And you would have rightfully conveyed the anxiety to us.
I would, as you know,
I feel a
I'm
great
good
deal
at
of
that.
comfort that our attorney is approving our IT program.
Well, that's not what he said.
As I say,
I know
Not-
what he's.
Manager Olson.
Yeah, he's keeping us from going down a rat hole that we don't want to go down. So, no, it,
you certainly can.
yeah,
It's a rat hole, that's for sure.
we're doing the same thing in industry. The more off the shelf you can get, the more global something can be used. It's just a much better way to go. So, and these people are doing a good job.
Anything
We
else?
would negotiate with WSB, we do not negotiate with Microsoft.
Right.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Reynolds, and
Thank
thank
you.
you, Manager Olson, for being our
Yeah.
liaison here.
Welcome.
Throw my pen away. Let's go to item 11.4, which is Resolution 19055. Mr. Beck.
President White, Board of Managers, what I have before you today is authorization to execute a contract with Wank Associates for the Long Lake Creek Subwatershed Nutrient Assessment. To give you a brief overview, we're going to be talking about Long Lake Creek, where the subwatershed is, and some of the resource issues and drivers of poor water quality in Long Lake Creek subwatershed. In addition, a little bit of information on the partnership background, the Bowser Clean Water Grant Fund that we obtained, on top of some project overview and the request. Just for some background, Long Lake Creek is not one of our focal geographies, and the focal geographies are highlighted in red, and Long Lake Creek is technically one of our responsive model programs. The primary issues in Long Lake Creek subwatershed are excess nutrients, flooding, degraded in-lake habitat, and disconnected corridors, and that's primarily driven by altered wetlands, common carp, stormwater runoff, and internal sediment loading in lakes. So just putting up our implementation model again as a reminder, the goal for this project primarily is understanding our natural resource at a more granular level. And so we want to figure out, we know what the issues and drivers are, but we don't know what the strategy is quite yet. To really be able to pick out what those projects are, integrate them, prioritize them, and work with our partners to find which things are going to be implemented most easily. And so the reason why this project was moving forward is because of the partnership efforts that have happened over 2017 to 2018. There was a lot of support from our partners in Long Lake, Medina, Orono, Long Lake Water Association, in which they conducted a carp assessment to identify that there is quite high biomass of carp in Long Lake. In addition, and in parallel, we were working on water quality monitoring to support modeling in the future. And so both groups were working to figure out the issues and drivers at a more granular level. It was really nice because we could use that data to obtain a $112,000 Bowser Clean Water Fund grant to help not just figure out what the problems are, help implement projects to fix those problems. And so the real goal of this project isn't to collect more data, but it's to identify projects and bring those concept designs further along and assemble an implementation plan that both we can approve and also give to our partners to use in the future. There's two general parts to this project, which first is developing a carp management strategy. We know carp biomass is quite high, just like we knew in 6 Mile carp biomass was quite high. So the next step is really developing that strategy, figuring out where they're reproducing, where they are, where we can remove them, and developing that strategy so if we do remove carp, we know that they're not coming back. The second strategy is watershed and in-lake nutrient management strategies. So identifying the hotspots, whether it's in the watershed or in the lake, and being able to come up with cost-effective projects to reduce nutrient loading to our lakes. And lastly, developing a partner roadmap for implementation. So because this is a responsive model, we're not going to be leading the implementation. However, it is nice to be able to have a roadmap that we've seen before and help develop with them. So if you remember, at the last board meeting on April 25th, the first portion of this grant we received authorization to enter contract with WSB to do the CARP portion. So they're helping us with a few pieces that we don't have capacity to do. And what I have today is approval to do the second part, which is that nutrient assessment, and work with Wank Associates. So the different portions of the nutrient assessment are watershed and in-lake nutrient assessment. So really that's going to be led by Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. Whereas the wetland assessment and project identification and design is for the engineer. And this is a little bit unique relative to how we've done projects in the past because we are developing the watershed models and the in-lake models to do the assessment, to identify where the hotspots of phosphorus are in the watershed and in lakes. The difference is we're understanding what's going on in the watershed using the data and the modeling and handing that off to the engineer to design the projects. So here's the areas that we're looking at that have problems, handing that off and saying, please design projects to help us reduce the nutrients and bringing those further in design. So we sent out a proposal to 7 engineers and we received a submission from Wank Associates. We only received 1. So the selection process was relatively easy. We had a framework. Wank Associates scored the highest. And so what I have before you today is seeking board approval to execute contract with Wank Associates not to exceed $50,000 to conduct the Long Lake Creek Subwatershed Nutrient Assessment.
Move approval.
Manager Miller has moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus. Any questions for Mr. Beck?
I've got a question, not necessarily on this project, but this is the responsive model. And I think this is probably the first one we're doing. Is that correct?
At this
Are we kind of setting up a system for the responsive model that requires, step 1, 2, 3, and et cetera, so that we've got a consistent format for future requests?
Manager Miller, managers, yes. I just talked to Brian and Becky about that this week, both in terms of how we convene our partners at a staff and policy level so that as we go off and do this work, we don't want to be, for example, showing up when the work's done and presenting recommendations to City Council and not have them really understanding what's happening. So there will be a project management plan that just really clearly lays out what those steps are. I think one of the challenge points for us is we're implementing the responsive model while actually yet we haven't outlined the policy that the board wants to use to implement it much in the way that we've done for our focal geography. So we're sort of doing and setting policy at the same time. So we have had a conversation about being very careful about any precedents that we're setting. And this is this is at a scale at which I don't know that we'd readily anticipate other projects coming before us in as sort of a responsive track. When you think about some of the other sub-watersheds and a project, for example, coming out of Mound's local surface water plan, or a project request from the city of Wayzata or something like that, those need to get funneled and prioritized into a rolling capital improvement plan. This is the research and monitoring department being responsive to partner needs on an entire sub-watershed scale. So we're sort of using terminology pretty loose, if you ask me, because the approach that we're taking is the exact same approach we would take in 6 Mile and Minnehaha Creek. Brian and his team are looking at the entire system across all lakes, streams, wetlands, across all cities, diagnosing the issues and drivers, and then coming up with a robust CIP. So we're figuring it out, basically.
Just if I could,
Go ahead.
I like this project, and I like the way everything is set up on it, but I'm on this responsive model.
Yes.
I think it's really critical that we don't get into an issue where we're spreading projects around for its own sake, and that we've got some policy frameworks that we accept these projects.
Right. So we've had that conversation internally. I think we had the conversation this week as well, just as we've been working our way into getting the grant funds and doing the assistance we're bringing to the communities is in our bailiwick. It's the technical assistance and understanding at a system scale what's driving the in-lake problems and what can be done about it. Having some foresight, and we talked to Brian about this, of once we develop project recommendations, there's going to be immediate request for funding assistance. So in parallel with this diagnostic work and starting to outline what are the issues and the drivers and the strategies and the specific project plan, we need to be using this as our leading edge case study, the responsive model, and setting those policies and checkpoints with the board so that we don't just deliver a plan and be a victim of our own success and have a bunch of project requests made to us. So managing expectations for what we are going to do versus the roadmap we're giving communities, I think, is really going to be paramount, and we're thinking about that and planning for it. And I think it's a legitimate concern for the board to have.
Thank you. Manager Olson.
And to that end, we had a detailed discussion with the CAC where we had our planned objectives versus our opportunities. And there were many steps that were discussed with them. Becky, laid it all out for everybody. And in a sense, that is what you're asking for, is that organized thought process. And they did make comments and they made recommendations as well on that. And that was 2 meetings ago.
Okay.
So it's past their review already. But I don't know that we've published it yet.
I think in planning and policy committee, we had a discussion of this, at least one, and sort of listing the criteria that would be considered and needing to put that into a format, I guess. Anything else? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We will go to the administrator's report, and then Mr. Welsh has offered to give a brief summary following that of the White Bear Lake decision. So, Mr. Whisker.
Would you like to go first? Going to bring it around home with White Bear Lake.
Going out on an excitement note.
Sounds good. I've got kind of 3 areas of update. The first one is, as usual, water levels. I'm not going to go through the full sort of regalia. The board and anybody that's subscribed to our high water level updates would have received an update yet this afternoon, I think around 5 o'clock. Between May 8th and today, May 9th, we've received across the watershed in the west around 1.5 inches as you move down towards the eastern part of the watershed. Totals have crept up to around 1.8. That's jumped Lake Minnetonka 2.4 inches, so we're up to 929.87. That's just 1.5 inches or 1.56 inches below that 930 elevation of the emergency spillway. And we're currently discharging, because of the rainfall that we've received, 250 cubic feet per second out of the Grays Bay Dam. Down at Hiawatha right now, we're reading around 370 cubic feet per second. And as you'll see from the email, we're going to be sustaining that discharge out of Grays Bay Dam until the lake drops about 3 inches, or we get another forecasted big rain, in which case the dam would be ratcheted down to allow the creek to subside nominally and then open back up to provide some relief. So that's sort of where we are with water levels, and feel free to let us know if you've got questions when you read that more detailed update in your email. I've got some handouts here that I'll pass down as I'm talking. Last Friday I presented at the, I think I've got a, no, I just handed you one. The Minnesota Real Estate Journal's Land Summit. And this is a summit for developers, builders. It's essentially a trade association. Developers, builders, community development directors. I sat on a panel, we're plugging into these trade associations, and we usually get plugged in the regulatory panel because they want to know what are the regulatory constraints or challenges for developers in the land use community. And we've been plugging in, I've been plugging in Sensible Land Use Coalition, this Real Estate Journal, and others to deliver the message of, that was strange, to deliver the message of the value that we can add when we're involved very early in the public and private land use planning process. So we've talked about some of our project examples with the Mater family or Japs Olson. The piece that I'm handing out, and one of the things that was interesting is, as part of their trade floor, there was a booth called for watershed responsibility, and so I was picking up some of the literature, and a gentleman walked up to me and asked what he could tell me about watershed districts. And so I asked him, who he was and what he was about, and it was a gentleman by the name of Mark Lambert, and I think the board through the legislative update's been made aware that Mr. Lambert had, from his perspective, a negative interaction with Bronze Creek watershed and introduced legislation this last session that's probably going to be a perennial issue to change the requirements for how watersheds regulate and set regulations. And so the interesting point was he's now got a logo, he's got marketing materials, he has a booth, and on the regulatory panel I sat on, there was a land use attorney and a gentleman from Westwood Engineering Services, and it was a sort of a lively debate back and forth, and towards the end they made a plug for Minnesota Association for Watershed Responsibility and had a lot to say about the how difficult watershed regulations are. So I think this is really good insight and information into what developers hear at their trade conferences, and this is one of our target markets, one of the demographics we want to reach and view Minnehaha Creek differently and view us as a value-added partner and come to us early and view us as a resource as well as a regulator. And so these insights start to inform not only where MAUD and we want to position legislatively, but also our strategic communications and some of the policy development. And it ended up being a good opportunity for us to get our message out in direct contrast to this kind of messaging, and just gives you some insight into the level of energy some people are putting behind talking about watersheds to the land use community and how important it is for us to sort of counteract and fill that vacuum. The last thing that I have for you tonight is just a very brief note. I think the board's fully aware now that we've had some transition in our education and communications department this week. Mr. Lochner's last day with the watershed was Tuesday. Telly and I are working on that transition plan with staff, and as well as sort of driving the strategic direction forward. And I've had touch points with all of you, so if you have questions about that, you'll let me know. But Telly and I are working on that, and we'll follow up with any questions that you might have. And if there aren't any others, on to White Bear Lake.
Here we go. White Bear Lake it is.
Managers are generally familiar with the background in this case, which is the lowering of White Bear Lake up in the northeast part of the Medfield area has been tied to drawdown of the underlying groundwater because of some unique geological conditions in that area. Led to two homeowners associations bringing suit against DNR, and the city town of White Bear Lake was also joined in the lawsuit. the district court issued a very broad rule that mandated, a broad order that made a number of different requirements on the DNR with regard to groundwater. Required this quite a bit of restriction on review within a 5-mile area of the lake on groundwater permitting, and needless to say, that was appealed to the Court of Appeals, the second highest court in the state, and that ruling was issued, if I remember right, I don't have it right in front of me, on April 22nd, so a couple weeks ago. And I just briefly, to bring the managers up to speed on some of the sort of major points of that decision by the Court of Appeals. It was a 2-to-1 decision, so the majority prevailed and sent the decision, really handcuffed the district court, and sent the decision back in a posture that's very favorable to the cities in the area and to DNR, in that it requires re-review of the groundwater withdrawal permitting decisions by DNR. So it sends virtually all of the decision making back to DNR, who wanted it and appealed for it. An interesting element of the decision was that the attorneys who brought the case for the homeowners had a very interesting argument that drew in what's called the public trust doctrine and extended that to the groundwater. My personal view is it was not much of an extension because there was such strong evidence, some of it to DNR's chagrin paid for with their money, that showed a really strong connection between withdrawing the groundwater and the lake levels. So the public trust doctrine very clearly applies to the lake. The Court of Appeals decided that it does not apply to groundwater, which, in my view and analysis, is a decision they did not need to make. So they really cuffed the court more than I think was necessary. And one further opinion on that is that they really teed that up to go to the Supreme Court for a decision. But meanwhile, the district court has only the option of sending the decision-making process, as I say, back to DNR. And the interesting part about that is they will have to go through and look at some permits that were issued in the 60s for groundwater withdrawals and reanalyze them under the groundwater law now, which requires DNR to make a sustainability determination, which is certainly something that nobody did in the 60s or 70s with regard to groundwater withdrawals. So it will either go from here to the Supreme Court, and the plaintiffs have said that they will appeal to the Supreme Court, but have a couple weeks to decide and in fact do that, or go back to DNR, and we'll see a long process of reviewing those permits up in that neck of the woods.
Does this have a potential to affect us in any significant way?
I should have started with that, Madam Chair. No. In short, no, only in as much as it affects water law broadly in Minnesota. Your statute, all your authority is statutory, so the public trust doctrine is something we would maybe look at in the big picture in the suit, but on your day-to-day operations and programs and practices.
Thank you so much. We are adjourned.